Welcome back, my fellow night owls. I'm thrilled to have you back in this little corner of darkness. Your support means everything to me. It's what keeps these chilling stories alive. So, thank you for being here. I'm not here to ask for likes, but I truly appreciate every ounce of encouragement you send my way. If you enjoy what you see, maybe consider giving this video a thumbs up. It really helps keep the shadows at bay. Voices in the fog. I've been camping my whole life, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened last month. I was on a solo backpacking trip in the Cascade Mountains, something I do every year to clear my head and reconnect with nature. The first 2 days were perfect. Crisp mountain air, stunning views, and that peaceful solitude I always crave. On the third day, I woke up to a thick fog blanketing everything. No big deal, I thought. Fog's pretty common in these parts. I packed up camp and hit the trail, figuring the fog would burn off as the day went on. But it didn't. If anything, it got thicker. By midday, I could barely see 10 feet in front of me. The trail markers were hard to spot, and I started to worry about getting lost. That's when I first heard it. A voice, faint but clear, calling out from somewhere in the fog. Hello? Can anyone hear me? It sounded like a woman, and she seemed distressed. I called back, asking if she needed help. No response. I figured maybe the fog was playing tricks with sound, so I kept hiking, keeping an ear out in case I heard her again. About an hour later, I heard it again. This time, it was a man's voice. Where are you? I can't find the trail. It seemed to be coming from my left, off the trail. I stopped and listened hard, but again, no follow-up. I was starting to get freaked out. The fog was so dense now that I could barely see my own feet. The voices kept coming, sometimes sounding close, sometimes far away. Men, women, even what sounded like children. All calling for help, all seeming lost and scared. I wanted to help, but I was terrified of leaving the trail. I'd heard stories of hikers getting lost in fog like this, never to be found. So I kept going, trying to block out the voices, telling myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. As night fell, I knew I had to make camp. I found a small clearing just off the trail and set up my tent with shaking hands. The voices had stopped, but the silence was almost worse. It felt heavy, expectant. I tried to sleep, but every sound had me on edge. The fog pressed against my tent like a living thing. And then, just as I was drifting off, the voices started again. But this time, they were right outside my tent. Help us, they whispered. Join us. We're so alone out here. I was paralyzed with fear. The voices were all around me now, a chorus of pleas and cries. I could hear movement outside, like people shuffling around my tent. But when I shone my flashlight at the tent walls, I saw no shadows, no silhouettes, just that impenetrable fog. I don't know how long I lay there, trembling, listening to those voices. They never got aggressive, never threatened me, just kept asking for help, begging me to come out. As terrifying as it was, there was also this weird pull, like part of me wanted to unzip the tent and step out into the fog. When dawn finally came, the fog started to lift. The voices faded with it. By the time the sun was fully up, it was a beautiful, clear day. No sign of the fog, no sign of anyone else around. I packed up faster than I ever have and practically ran back to the trailhead. When I got to my car, I found a note under my windshield wiper. It was from the park ranger, warning hikers about a heavy fog rolling in and advising them to stay on marked trails. The thing is, the note was dated 3 days before I even started my hike. I've tried to rationalize what happened. Maybe it was altitude sickness, or exhaustion, or my mind playing tricks on me. But deep down, I know what I heard was real. Those voices in the fog were calling to me, and a part of me still wonders what would have happened if I'd answered. I still go camping, but never alone anymore. And whenever I see fog rolling in, I pack up and get the hell out of there. Some things in nature, man, they're better left alone. Scratches on the car. Alright, so this happened to me about 3 months ago, and I'm still trying to make sense of it. I work as a night security guard at this big tech company on the outskirts of town. It's usually a pretty chill job. I do my rounds, watch the cameras, and mostly just try to stay awake. The company's building is in this weird spot, right where the city kind of fades into wilderness. There's a small parking lot for employees, and beyond that, it's just dense forest. I always park my car at the far end of the lot, facing the woods. I like to take smoke breaks and watch the trees, you know? Anyway, this particular night started like any other. I clocked in at 10 p.m., did my first round, then settled in for a long, quiet night. Around 2 a.m., I decided to take a smoke break. I headed out to my car, lit up, and leaned against the hood, facing the forest. That's when I first noticed something odd. The woods seemed darker than usual, like unnaturally dark. I couldn't shake this feeling that something was watching me from between the trees. I tried to laugh it off. Too many horror movies, right? But I cut my brakes short and headed back inside. For the next few hours, I kept glancing at the camera pointed at the parking lot. Nothing unusual, just my car sitting there in the dim light of the lot. But every time I looked, that uneasy feeling got stronger. At about 5 a.m., I decided to do another round. As I passed by the windows overlooking the parking lot, I froze. There was something out there, moving between the cars. It was low to the ground and fast. I only caught a glimpse before it disappeared into the shadows. My heart was racing. I told myself it was probably just a coyote or something, but deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Whatever I saw was bigger than a coyote, and it moved. Wrong. I spent the rest of my shift glued to the cameras, but I didn't see anything else. When 6 a.m. rolled around and my relief showed up, I was a nervous wreck. I practically ran to my car, fumbling with my keys. That's when I saw them. Scratches. Deep, jagged scratches all along the driver's side of my car. They started at the front fender and ran all the way to the back, like something had dragged its claws along the entire length of the vehicle. I just stood there, staring. These weren't here when I came to work, and they definitely weren't from a branch or another car. They were too deliberate, too angry. With shaking hands, I unlocked the car and got in. As I was about to start the engine, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There was a handprint on the driver's window. A huge handprint, way bigger than any human's, with long, pointed fingers, and it was on the inside of the car. I don't remember the drive home. I just know I was shaking so bad I could barely steer. When I got home, I checked the inside of the car thoroughly. No signs of entry, nothing missing. Just that handprint, which had started to fade like breath on glass. I called in sick the next day and went to get my car checked out. The mechanic was baffled by the scratches, said he'd never seen anything like it. The metal was gouged so deep in some places that he said it should have gone right through. But it hadn't. I quit my job after that. Couldn't handle being in that parking lot at night anymore. I've tried to convince myself it was just some elaborate prank, but deep down, I know it wasn't. Sometimes, when I'm driving at night, I swear I can see something running alongside my car in the darkness. And every morning, I check my car for new scratches, terrified of what I might find. I don't know what was out there that night, but I do know one thing. It knew I was watching it, and it wanted me to know it was watching me back. Shadows by the lake. Alright, so this happened to me last summer, and I still get goosebumps thinking about it. I'm a pretty avid fisherman, and I love going on solo camping trips to this secluded lake about 3 hours from my place. It's a bit of a hike to get there, but the fishing is amazing, and the solitude is exactly what I need sometimes. I'd been to the spot maybe half a dozen times before. Always had a great time. This trip started off no different. I hiked in on a Friday afternoon, set up camp near the shore, and spent the evening catching some nice trout for dinner. As night fell, I got a fire going and sat back, enjoying the peace and quiet. The moon was almost full, casting this silvery light over the lake. It was beautiful, but something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but the air seemed heavier somehow. I tried to shake off the feeling and turned in for the night. That's when things started getting weird. I woke up around 2 a.m. to what sounded like whispers coming from the lake. At first, I thought I was dreaming, but as I became more alert, the sounds got clearer. I unzipped my tent and peered out. The lake was dead calm, like glass, reflecting the moonlight. But along the shoreline, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Shadows. Moving shadows that shouldn't be there. They were tall, easily 7 or 8 feet, and they seemed to glide along the water's edge. I couldn't make out any features, just these dark, elongated shapes. And the whispers, they were definitely coming from these things. I was frozen in place, torn between ducking back into my tent and making a run for it. That's when one of the shadows stopped and turned towards me. I swear, even though I couldn't see eyes, I knew it was looking right at me. The whispering got louder, and the shadow started moving in my direction. That snapped me out of my paralysis. I zipped up the tent and grabbed my flashlight, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I could hear it getting closer. The whispers now a harsh, guttural sound that didn't seem human at all. When it was right outside my tent, everything went silent. Then, slowly, a shadow fell across the tent wall, a long, distorted hand reaching out. I lost it. I burst out of the tent, flashlight in hand, and ran. I didn't care about my gear, didn't care about anything except getting the hell out of there. As I ran, I could hear them behind me. Not footsteps, but a sound like wind rushing through trees, getting closer and closer. I don't know how long I ran. It felt like hours. When I finally stopped, gasping for air, I realized I was lost. The forest looked different in the dark, and in my panic, I'd veered off the trail. I spent the rest of the night huddled under a large tree, jumping at every sound, my flashlight clutched in shaking hands. When dawn finally broke, I managed to find my way back to the trailhead and my car. I reported what happened to the park rangers. They searched the area but found nothing unusual. My campsite was untouched, tent still there, no sign of any disturbance. They chalked it up to an overactive imagination or maybe some local kids playing a prank. But I know what I saw. Those shadows weren't natural, and those whispers, I still hear them sometimes in my dreams. I've done some research since then, looking into the history of that lake. Turns out, there are old legends about it being a thin place, somewhere the veil between our world and something else is weak. Some stories talk about people going missing there or coming back changed. I haven't been camping since that night. Hell, I can barely bring myself to fish in the local pond now. Sometimes when I'm near water at night, I think I see those shadows out of the corner of my eye. And every time, I run. I don't know what those things were by the lake that night. But I do know they were real, they were not human, and they were hunting me. And sometimes, I can't shake the feeling that they're still out there, waiting for me to come back. Strange lights on the mountain. Okay, so this happened to me about 6 months ago, and I still can't explain it. I'm an amateur photographer, and I love taking night sky shots. There's this spot in the mountains about 2 hours from my place that's perfect for stargazing. No light pollution, clear skies, the works. I'd been there a bunch of times before, always alone because none of my friends are into staying up all night for photos. This time was no different. I packed my gear, drove up there in the afternoon and set up camp. The plan was to shoot from sunset to sunrise, catching the Milky Way and maybe some meteors if I was lucky. Everything was normal at first. I got some great shots as the sun went down and the stars came out in full force. It was around 2 a.m. when things got weird. I was adjusting my camera for another long exposure when I noticed something odd in the viewfinder. There were lights on the mountain across the valley. At first, I thought it might be other campers or hikers. But this mountain was off limits, too dangerous to climb, especially at night. The lights were moving, but not like flashlights. They were floating, almost dancing across the mountainside. I watched them through my telephoto lens, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. They were orb-like, glowing a soft blue-white color. Sometimes they'd merge together, then split apart again. I started taking photos and videos, my heart racing. This was unlike anything I'd ever seen before. The lights moved in patterns that seemed almost intelligent. They'd form geometric shapes, then dissolve into chaos, only to reform again. After about an hour of this, the lights started to change. They grew brighter, and their colors shifted to a deep, pulsing red. That's when I heard it. A low, humming sound that seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was so loud, I could feel it in my chest, but at the same time, it was like it was inside my head. The humming got louder, and the lights started moving faster, swirling together into a massive, pulsating orb. I was terrified, but couldn't look away. My camera was still clicking away on its tripod, capturing everything. Suddenly, there was a flash so bright it left me seeing spots. When my vision cleared, the lights were gone. The mountain was dark, and the humming had stopped. I stood there for a long time, trying to process what I'd just witnessed. When the sun came up, I packed up my gear and headed home. I was exhausted, but too wired to sleep. I couldn't wait to check my photos and videos to prove to myself that it had really happened. But when I uploaded everything to my computer, my heart sank. All the photos and videos from after 2 a.m. were corrupted. Just static and digital noise. The only clear shot was a single photo taken just before the lights appeared, showing the normal starlit mountain. I've spent months trying to figure out what I saw that night. I've researched everything, from ball lightning to secret military tests, but nothing fits. I've gone back to that spot several times, but I've never seen the lights again. I know how this sounds. If someone told me this story, I'd think they were making it up or had been hallucinating. But I know what I saw. Those lights were real, and they were doing things that should be impossible. I haven't told many people about this. My friends think I'm joking when I bring it up, and I'm afraid of being labeled as some crazy UFO guy. But I can't stop thinking about it. What were those lights? Why were they there? And why didn't my camera capture them? I don't have any answers, but I know one thing for sure. I'll never look at the night sky the same way again, and part of me is always watching, hoping to see those strange lights one more time. The abandoned campsite. Alright, so this happened to me and my girlfriend Sarah about 3 weeks ago. We're both pretty experienced hikers, and we decided to do a 4-day trek through a less traveled part of the Appalachian Trail. We'd heard it was beautiful, but also that not many people went there, because it was kind of out of the way. The first 2 days were amazing. The scenery was breathtaking, and we had the trail mostly to ourselves. We saw maybe 2 other hikers the whole time. On the 3rd day, though, things got weird. We were about halfway through our planned route when we stumbled upon this campsite. At first, we were psyched because it looked perfect. Flat ground, a cleared area for a fire, even a makeshift bench made from a fallen log. But as we got closer, something felt off. The site looked like someone had just up and left in a hurry. There was a tent still set up, a couple of camping chairs around a cold fire pit, and some gear scattered around. We called out, thinking maybe the campers were nearby, but no one answered. Sarah wanted to keep moving, but I was curious. I mean, who leaves all their gear behind like that? As we looked closer, things got even stranger. The tent was an old model, like something from the 80s or 90s. The sleeping bags inside were musty and damp, like they'd been there for ages. There was an ancient-looking Walkman next to one of the sleeping bags, complete with a tape inside. The weirdest part? There was food laid out on a picnic table, cans of beans, some old packets of dehydrated camping meals, even a loaf of bread. But it was all brand names and packaging I'd never seen before. The expiration dates on the cans were from 1993. At this point, Sarah was freaking out. She kept saying we should leave, that something wasn't right. I agreed, but I couldn't help taking a few pictures first. The whole scene was just so bizarre. As we were about to leave, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There was a disposable camera on the table. Out of morbid curiosity, I picked it up. It still had a few shots left, so I snapped a picture of the campsite. That's when we heard it. A voice, faint but clear, coming from the woods behind the campsite. It sounded like a woman calling for help. Sarah and I looked at each other, both pale as ghosts. We called back, asking if anyone needed help, but there was no response. We debated what to do. Part of me felt like we should investigate, but Sarah was adamant about leaving. In the end, we compromised. We left a note explaining that we'd found the site and were reporting it to the park rangers, along with the date and our names. As we hurried away, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. We hiked for hours, barely talking, just wanting to put as much distance between us and that campsite as possible. When we finally made it back to civilization, we reported what we'd found to the park rangers. They seemed concerned and said they'd check it out. They took our contact info and said they'd be in touch. It's been 3 weeks now, and we haven't heard anything. I've tried calling the ranger station a couple of times, but they always seem evasive, saying the matter is under investigation. The weirdest part? When I got home and developed the pictures from our trip. Yeah, I still use a film camera sometimes. The shot I took of the abandoned campsite was missing. Not just blank, but completely gone, like I'd never taken it at all. I don't know what we stumbled upon that day, but I can't stop thinking about it. Was it some kind of time slip? Elaborate hoax? Or something even stranger? All I know is, I won't be hiking that trail again anytime soon. The lone backpack. So this happened to me about 6 months ago, and I still get chills thinking about it. I'm an avid hiker, and I often go on solo trips in the Adirondacks. This particular hike was supposed to be a 3-day trek through a pretty remote area. I started early on a Friday morning. The weather was perfect, and I was in high spirits. The trail was challenging but beautiful, winding through dense forests and along rocky ridges. By late afternoon, I'd covered about 12 miles and decided to set up camp for the night. I found a nice spot near a small stream and got everything set up. As I was gathering firewood, I noticed something odd about 50 yards away. There was a backpack leaning against a tree, just sitting there, all alone. At first, I thought maybe another hiker had left it there while exploring. But as I got closer, I realized this pack looked old and weathered, like it had been there for a while. The fabric was faded and there were leaves and twigs caught in the straps. I called out, thinking maybe the owner was nearby, but got no response. The sun was setting, and an uneasy feeling started to creep over me. Why would someone leave their pack here? In the middle of nowhere? I debated whether to open it. On one hand, it felt like an invasion of privacy. On the other, there might be information inside that could explain why it was there. In the end, curiosity won out. The zipper was rusty and stuck, but I managed to get it open. Inside, I found some old moldy clothes, a water bottle, and a journal. The pages were warped from moisture, but I could still make out some of the writing. The last entry was dated 3 years ago. It read, "Day 4, I think I'm lost. Haven't seen the trail in 2 days. Something feels wrong about these woods. Keep hearing noises at night, not animal noises. Tomorrow I'm going to try to backtrack. If anyone finds this, please contact." The rest was too smudged to read. My heart was pounding. I looked around, half expecting to see someone watching me from the trees. But there was nothing. Just the darkening forest and the eerie silence. I took some photos of the backpack and the journal entry, then zipped everything back up and left it where I found it. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd stumbled onto something I wasn't supposed to see. That night was the longest of my life. Every sound had me on edge. I kept imagining footsteps circling my tent, but when I'd shine my flashlight outside, there was nothing there. I barely slept. At first light, I packed up and started hiking again, eager to put some distance between me and that backpack. But as the day wore on, I started noticing things. Weird things. like how the trail markers seemed to disappear for stretches at a time, or how I'd come across clearings that looked eerily similar to ones I thought I'd passed hours ago. And the silence. No birds, no insects, just the sound of my own breathing and footsteps. By late afternoon, I was in full-on panic mode. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was going in circles. That's when I saw it again. The backpack, leaning against a tree exactly as I'd left it. But that was impossible. I'd been hiking all day in the opposite direction. There was no way I could have ended up back here. I ran. I didn't care about the trail anymore. I just picked a direction and ran until my lungs burned. Somehow, I made it back to my car just as night was falling. I reported what I'd found to the park rangers, showed them the photos. They said they'd look into it, but I never heard anything back. I've tried to research missing hikers in that area, but found nothing conclusive. I still hike, but never alone, and never in that part of the Adirondacks. Sometimes, when I'm in the woods, I swear I can hear something following me. And every time I see a backpack on the trail, my blood runs cold. I don't know what happened to the owner of that backpack, but I do know those woods aren't natural, and I can't shake the feeling that someday someone's going to stumble across my abandoned pack, wondering what happened to me. The midnight whistle. Okay, so this happened to me last summer when I went camping with my buddy Mike. We're both pretty experienced campers, but this trip freaked us out like nothing before. We picked a spot in the Adirondacks, about a 4-hour drive from where we live. It was supposed to be a chill weekend, just us getting away from the city noise and enjoying nature. The first day was great. We hiked, set up camp, and had a few beers around the fire. It was around midnight when things got weird. We were about to turn in when we heard this faint whistling sound. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but it kept getting louder and clearer. It sounded like someone was whistling a tune, but I couldn't quite make out what it was. Mike and I looked at each other, both thinking the same thing. Who the hell would be out here whistling at midnight? We were miles from any trails or campsites. I grabbed my flashlight and scanned the tree line, but couldn't see anything. The whistling stopped for a bit, then started again, this time closer. It was clearer now, and I realized it was the tune of Pop Goes the Weasel. Super creepy, right? We called out, thinking maybe it was another camper playing a prank, but no one answered. We decided to pack up and leave, screw waiting until morning. As we were taking down the tent, the whistling got even closer. It seemed to be coming from all around us now. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely untie the ropes. Just as we finished packing, the whistling stopped abruptly. The silence was almost worse. We practically ran to the car, throwing our stuff in the back. As I was about to get in, I shone my flashlight towards the trees one last time. That's when I saw it. A figure, just standing there at the edge of our campsite. It was too dark to make out any features, but I swear it was unnaturally tall and thin. And then it started whistling again. We peeled out of there so fast, I'm surprised we didn't crash. The whole drive home, we kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that figure following us. To this day, I have no idea what that was. A prankster? Some weirdo living in the woods? Or something else entirely? All I know is I haven't been camping since, and that damn tune still gives me chills whenever I hear it. The missing hiker. This happened 2 summers ago, and I still get chills thinking about it. I was working as a seasonal park ranger in Glacier National Park, mostly doing trail maintenance and helping lost hikers. It was my dream job, being out in nature, helping people, and getting paid for it. One day in late July, we got a call about a missing hiker. This wasn't uncommon. People often underestimate the wilderness and get themselves into trouble. But this case was different from the start. The missing person was a woman named Sarah, 28 years old, experienced hiker. She'd gone out on a popular day trail, told her boyfriend she'd be back by sunset. When she didn't return, he called us. We started the search at first light the next day. I was paired with Mike, a veteran ranger who'd been doing this for 20 years. We took the trail Sarah was supposed to have hiked, looking for any signs of her. The weird thing was, we couldn't find any. No footprints, no discarded water bottles, nothing. It was like she'd never been on the trail at all. We searched all day, called her name until our voices were hoarse, but found nothing. As we were about to head back, Mike spotted something off-trail. It was Sarah's backpack, sitting neatly at the base of a large pine tree. This was strange for two reasons. First, it was a good 100 yards off the trail in dense underbrush. Second, it looked completely undisturbed, like someone had just set it down for a moment. We called in the Discovery and started searching the area. That's when things got really weird. About 50 feet from the backpack, we found a single boot, Sarah's size, matching the description of what she was wearing. Another 50 feet beyond that, we found the other boot. They were placed neatly, like someone had been walking and just stepped out of them. By this point, the sun was setting and we had to suspend the search for the night. I couldn't sleep, kept thinking about those boots and how wrong it all felt. The next day, the search expanded. We brought in dogs, helicopters, the works. I was paired with Mike again, and we decided to push further past where we'd found the boots. About a mile in, we found her jacket hanging from a branch. It was zipped up, like someone had hung it there to dry. No tears, no blood, nothing to indicate a struggle. Just a jacket hanging in the middle of nowhere. We kept going, and that's when we saw it. In a small clearing ahead, there was a figure standing with their back to us. My heart leapt. Could it be Sarah? But as we got closer, I realized something was off. The figure wasn't moving, at all. When we reached the clearing, I felt the blood drain from my face. It wasn't Sarah. It wasn't anyone. It was her clothes, her shirt, pants, socks, all arranged on branches to look like a person. Everything was there except her underwear. Mike radioed it in, his voice shaking. We'd both seen some shit in our time, but nothing like this. As we waited for backup, I noticed something carved into a nearby tree. It looked like a symbol, but not one I recognized. Mike saw it too and went pale. He wouldn't tell me what it meant, just said we needed to leave. Now, they never found Sarah. The search was called off after 2 weeks. Officially, she's still listed as a missing person. But those of us who were there, we know she's not coming back. I quit my job after that summer. Couldn't handle being in those woods anymore. Mike retired too. Last I heard, he'd moved to Arizona, about as far from forests as you can get. I still hike sometimes, but never alone. And I always feel like I'm being watched. Like something out there is waiting, ready to take another hiker who strays just a little too far off the trail. The Ranger's Warning. So this happened last summer when my buddies and I decided to go on a camping trip in Yellowstone. There were 4 of us, me, Jake, Chris, and Mike. We'd been planning this trip for months, excited to spend a week in the wilderness, hiking and fishing. We arrived at the park early in the morning and headed to the ranger station to get our permits. The ranger on duty was this older guy, probably in his 60s, with a weathered face and sharp eyes. He seemed friendly enough at first, joking with us as he processed our paperwork. But then he asked where we were planning to camp. When we told him, his whole demeanor changed. He got real serious and said, "Boys, I wouldn't recommend that area. There's been some strange activity there lately." We pressed him for details, but he was vague, just muttering something about unexplained occurrences and campers reporting unusual experiences. He strongly suggested we pick a different spot, even offering to help us find an alternative. Now, we were all pretty stubborn guys, and this just made us more curious. We assured him we'd be fine and insisted on sticking to our original plan. The ranger sighed, shook his head, and said, "All right, but remember, if anything feels off, anything at all, you pack up and get out of there. Don't wait until morning. Don't try to tough it out. Just leave." We laughed it off at the time, thinking he was just being overly cautious. Man, I wish we'd listened to him. The first couple of days were great. The scenery was beautiful, The weather was perfect and we were having a blast. But on the third night, things started to get weird. It began with the sounds. We were sitting around the campfire when we heard what sounded like whispers coming from the woods. At first, we thought it was just the wind, but it kept getting clearer. We couldn't make out words, but it definitely sounded like voices. Jake wanted to go investigate, but I remembered the ranger's warning and convinced everyone to stay put. We decided to turn in early that night, feeling a bit uneasy. The next day, things escalated. We found strange symbols carved into trees around our campsite, symbols that definitely weren't there the day before. They looked ancient, like some kind of tribal markings, but none of us recognized them. That night, the whispers returned, louder this time. And then we saw the shadows. Dark figures moving just at the edge of our campfire's light, always disappearing when we looked directly at them. We were all freaked out, but tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just animals or our eyes playing tricks on us. But on the fifth night, we couldn't deny it anymore. We woke up to find our campsite trashed. Our food was scattered everywhere, our tents were slashed, and those symbols were carved into every tree around us. And the whispers, they were constant now, seeming to come from everywhere at once. That's when we decided to take the ranger's advice and get the hell out of there. We grabbed what we could and started hiking back in the dark. The whole time, we could hear something following us, branches breaking and leaves rustling just out of sight. We made it back to our car just as the sun was coming up. As we drove away, I swear I saw something in the rearview mirror. A tall, dark figure standing in the middle of the road watching us leave. We went straight to the ranger station, but the old ranger who'd warned us wasn't there. When we told the new guy our story, he looked confused. He said there hadn't been a ranger matching our description working there for years. To this day, we don't know what happened out there. We've tried researching those symbols but found nothing. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night thinking I hear those whispers. I don't know if it was some kind of elaborate prank or if we stumbled into something supernatural. But I do know one thing. Next time a ranger gives me a warning, I'm damn well gonna listen. The tracks that shouldn't be there. So, this happened to me about 2 months ago. I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. I've always been an outdoorsy guy and I love solo camping. There's something about being alone in nature that just recharges me, you know? Anyway, I decided to take a weekend trip to this secluded spot in the Ozarks. It's a bit off the beaten path, but that's what I like about it. I hiked in Friday afternoon, set up camp, and spent the evening chilling by the fire, reading a book. Everything was normal until I woke up Saturday morning. I unzipped my tent and stepped out to take a leak. That's when I noticed something odd. There were footprints in the dirt around my tent. At first, I thought maybe I'd made them the night before and just forgot. But these were different. They were bare feet prints, which was weird because I always wear boots when camping. And they were off somehow. The toes looked too long, and the heel was weirdly narrow. I followed the tracks with my eyes, and my blood ran cold when I realized they formed a perfect circle around my tent. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was an animal? But what animal walks on 2 legs and leaves human-like prints? I took some photos with my phone, thinking maybe I could figure it out later. Throughout the day, I kept looking over my shoulder. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I even considered packing up and leaving, but I told myself I was being paranoid. That night, I had trouble sleeping. Every little sound made me jump. I must have dozed off eventually because the next thing I knew, it was morning. I hesitated before unzipping the tent. Part of me didn't want to look. When I finally did, my heart nearly stopped. There were new tracks. This time, they led right up to my tent's entrance. The last print was half-formed, like whatever made it had been standing there, toes almost touching the tent fabric. I've never packed up camp so fast in my life. As I was leaving, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. My own boot prints from Friday, they were gone. The ground around my campsite was smooth, except for those bare, inhuman footprints. I ran most of the way back to my car. When I got home, I checked the photos on my phone, wanting to prove to myself that it had really happened. But the pictures were gone, not deleted, just never taken. I still go camping, but never alone anymore. And I always check for footprints in the morning.
We hope you enjoyed this chilling tale. If it sent shivers down your spine, give us a thumbs up and share your thoughts in the comments below. What was your favorite part? Don't forget to subscribe for more spine-tingling stories and hit that notification bell so you never miss a scare. Until next time, stay spooky and remember, sometimes the darkest shadows hide the most terrifying secret.